his words filled with pain and anger for all the abuse he suffered while fighting for his life. Today, we bring the story of a mother and daughter who abandoned their husband while he is fighting for his life. Dear subscribers, we have crossed 1,800 subscribers and are racing towards our first 2,000 subscribers. Please hit the subscribe button and hit the bell icon for notifications for our latest story. Share a like if you like this story. As the chemotherapy sessions continued, my body weakened, but my resolve to fight remains strong. Janet and Layla were my pillars of support, standing by me through the physical and emotional toll of the treatment. They juggled their responsibilities to ensure I had the care and comfort needed during those challenging times. Despite the difficult moments, we found ways to cherish the small victories, the days I could manage a short walk, the moments of laughter we shared despite the looming uncertainty. My wife's reassurances and Lila's unwavering presence kept me going. The love and support from my family became the driving force pushing me through each dusting day. Months passed, and as the chemotherapy progressed, I could see the toll it was taking on all of us. My once vibrant family dynamic shifted, but the core promise of standing together through thick and thin seemed shaken. However, as the treatment neared its end and the prospect of recovery glimmered on the horizon, an unexpected storm hit our lives. Janet and Layla gradually distanced themselves. It started with missed visits to the hospital, and eventually they stopped attending altogether. Confused and hurt, I confronted Janet about the sudden change. She spoke in vague terms about feeling overwhelmed and needing space. Layla echoed similar sentiments. My heart sank as I grappled with not only the physical effects of the treatment, but also the emotional abandonment from the ones I expected to be my strongest support. Years passed in this perplexing void. The house that had once been filled with the warmth of a family became an empty shell, echoing the loneliness that had taken residence in my heart. My attempts to reach out were met with silence or half-hearted responses, leaving me to navigate the aftermath of illness alone. Then, out of the blue, they returned, claiming the house as if nothing had happened. The pain and confusion I felt during those years of abandonment resurfaced, and I found myself grappling with a new reality, one where the family I thought would stand by me in sickness and health had crumbled only to resurface when material interests came into play. The battle against cancer had left its scars not only on my body, but also on the foundations of trust and commitment that wants to find my family. During those tough 2 months of chemotherapy, I tried my best not to be a burden on my wife, Janet, and our daughter, Layla. When I had the energy, I did what I could. But I started noticing they were getting agitated. It became harder to get their help, even for things like getting a glass of water or some fresh air. One day, I had an early chemo appointment, and I realized I was running late. I found out my wife was still in our room and suggested I take an Uber to the hospital because she was tired. Shocked, I called for an Uber and also asked the hospital for help since my wife couldn't be there. Luckily, the Uber driver was really kind and made sure I got to the hospital safely. She even offered to drive me back home after my treatment. It was nice, but it felt disheartening to depend on strangers. When I got back home, I had to confront my wife and daughter about what was going on. I felt a chilly atmosphere and couldn't ignore it anymore. I asked them if they thought I was becoming a burden. My wife admitted they were overwhelmed, and my daughter said she didn't expect me to be so needy during my illness. Feeling the need to find a solution, I suggested hiring a nurse a few days a week to help me with daily tasks and take me to chemotherapy. I even got a wheelchair, anticipating there would be days when I couldn't walk or talk. Thankfully, they agreed to this idea, and it was a relief to have a plan in place. I reached out to the hospital for help and got a nurse who was both kind and firm. She made sure I never missed a chemo appointment, got my medication on time, and created a care plan with healthy meals. Things were improving, and the doctors were pleased with my progress. However, my wife and daughter still weren't happy. My wife, especially, felt like the nurse was replacing her. I suggested that if she took on the responsibilities of taking me to chemo, filling prescriptions, and making sure I ate and took my meds on time, we could let go of the nurse. The only reason I had one was because I became too much for my wife to handle. She reluctantly agreed but wanted a male nurse. I explained that there were none on the hospital's list, and the nurse we had was chosen for her experience with cancer patients. I made it clear that the nurse would only be replaced if my wife and daughter were willing to take on her responsibilities. My wife wasn't happy with this and said I should do more for myself instead of making my condition everyone else's problem. I tried to explain that there were days when I could barely lift my head, let alone stand up, because the chemotherapy had taken a toll on my body. In anger, she stormed upstairs and slammed doors. I chose to ignore her tantrum, knowing her negativity would only hinder my recovery. My main focus remained on my health and well-being. Later that night, my mother-in-law, who lived 2 states away, called me expressing her displeasure about bringing another woman into her daughter's house. Technically, the house was in my name, owned before our marriage, but I took the high road. I explained politely that I needed help beyond what her daughter was willing to provide. I brought in a nurse temporarily for the duration of my remaining chemotherapy month. She didn't seem entirely convinced but eventually left me alone. For about a week after that, things seemed relatively normal. My treatment continued smoothly. Then, after returning from a chemotherapy session, I found a moving truck in front of my house. My wife and daughter had packed up, saying they were going to stay at their mother's place. It deeply hurt, and I was upset. But exhaustion kept me from expressing my feelings properly. The timing of their departure right after my chemo sessions, when I was spent and unable to communicate effectively, felt cruel. Seeking clarity, I asked my daughter if this is what she truly wanted. Her response hit me hard. She said she would rather live with her mother because she found it too difficult to live with me. It was a painful moment watching them leave feeling unwanted and abandoned. In my emotional turmoil, my brother stepped in. He noticed the nurse spending extra time with me and asked if I had family nearby who could help. Despite having 2 young children, he generously offered to take time off work and stay with me until I found a more permanent solution. He was furious about what my wife had done, calling her selfish and ungrateful. His time off was limited, but he suggested another solution. His wife's sister, Kara, was going through a painful divorce and needed a safe place to stay temporarily. She was studying radiology at a nearby university on a scholarship, and my home was conveniently closer to the campus. It seemed like an ideal solution. I agreed to the arrangement, assuring my brother that Kara wouldn't have to pay rent since she'd be putting up with me. She could choose whichever bedroom she preferred. My wife and daughter had taken almost everything, leaving only the bed and a few dresses. My brother stayed for the rest of the week, and Kara arrived on his last day. He helped her move in, and she expressed gratitude for letting her stay. Kara promised to be considerate, clean up after herself, and assist where needed. She was genuinely kind-hearted. I explained that she wouldn't have to do much since my nurse would now be coming 7 days a week instead of the previous 4. I bid farewell to my brother and helped Kara settle in as best as I could. In the weeks that followed, things went relatively smoothly. I missed my wife and daughter, but it seemed I was the only one feeling that way, because they didn't even bother to call or check up on me. Kara's presence proved to be a tremendous help. She took care of grocery shopping, handled most of the cleaning, and assisted with meal preparation. Throughout this time, she never complained. About a month and a half after my wife's departure, I received the news that I was cancer-free, a momentous occasion celebrated by ringing the bell at the hospital. My nurse asked me what I wanted to do next now that I was essentially cured. My immediate decision was to file for a unilateral divorce, freeing myself from a marriage that had proven unsupportive during my challenging journey. With the divorce proceedings in motion, my focus shifted toward the next crucial step: recovering from cancer. It was a journey in itself. Slowly, but surely, I began to regain my strength. My hair grew back, my scars started to heal, and I was putting on weight. I stuck to my healthy meal regime for the most part, but I allowed myself some cheat days to savor the favorite meals I had missed during my illness. It's been 6 months since I was declared cancer-free, and I believe I'm finally ready to move on with my life. I made a call to my old job, and they're willing to rehire me for remote work if I choose to return. I decided to take my old job up on their offer, and I'm planning to move away. While I do have an attachment to my house, there are just too many painful memories here. I'm yearning for a fresh start with something smaller. My wife doesn't know it yet, but I'm planning to give the house to Kara. She came through for me when I was at my lowest, showing immense kindness, even though we were practically strangers. She's free to sell it if she wishes. I no longer want anything to do with it, especially if it means my wife or daughter could lay claim to it. My new place is in a quiet neighborhood in the countryside, and I'm eagerly looking forward to this new beginning. Update number 1. Hey, wife and daughter. It's been over a year since my initial diagnosis, and I've settled into my new place and neighborhood nicely. There are plenty of friendly folks around here, and I've made friends with my neighbors, including Dorothy, who lives across the way. She's a widow who lives alone with her kids scattered across the country, visiting only during Christmas and her birthday. Dorothy invited me to report for drinks and conversation, and she shared the heartbreaking story of losing her husband to lung cancer. She emphasized how important life insurance was for her family's financial security. During our conversation, I opened up about what happened with my wife and daughter. Surprisingly, I still hadn't heard a word from them, but I've come to terms with it. I've been spending my time pursuing new hobbies, particularly woodworking, and I'm starting to build up a collection of tools. One day when I returned from the hardware store, Dorothy informed me that she had noticed some people hanging around my house. Fortunately, they didn't do anything harmful or steal anything, but they did approach the door, knock it a few times, wander around the house, and eventually waited in their car. Dorothy considered calling the sheriff's office, but decided against it, thinking they might be family. I asked her to describe them, and her description matched my wife and daughter. I couldn't fathom how they had found my new residence, as only my brother and his wife knew my current address. It left me wondering why they were looking for me after leaving almost a year ago without looking back. Dorothy assured me that if they returned, I shouldn't come out, and she would handle the situation. Frankly, I had no desire to interact with them after they abandoned me when I was at my lowest point. Later that night, I called my brother, who informed me that my wife and daughter had been harassing Kara and her roommate at my old house. Fortunately, Kara had documented proof that the house was now in her name, and she had explained that she had bought it for me, a smart move on her part. Feeling bad that Kara had to go through this ordeal because of my family, I called her directly to apologize. Hopefully, the next time they come around, I can resolve the situation for good. As for my wife, I'm not sure if she's aware of the unilateral divorce. My lawyer sent a copy to her mother's house, but it's possible they mistook it for junk mail. Regardless, I've reached a point where I no longer care. She and I are no more. Update number 2. My wife and daughter showed up at the house again, but this time, it was earlier in the day while I was working. I heard the knock and decided to check the security cameras, and sure enough, it was them. My ex-wife looked just as I remembered her, but Layla had grown significantly. She was practically a young woman now. I followed the plan. Dorothy and I had discussed staying inside, but moving closer to the door to hear them better. Dorothy, ever the good neighbor, came over to greet them and introduced herself. My wife asked if she knew a man named Richard who used to live there. Dorothy sounded just as baffled as I was in question her use of used to. My wife explained that her husband, not ex-husband, had lived in this house before his recent untimely death following an extended hospital stay. My jaw hit the floor at this revelation because, to my knowledge, there was no record of my death anywhere, especially not at the hospital where I underwent treatment. My wife went on to claim that they were the next of kin, implying that the home was rightfully theirs. Dorothy informed them that someone named Richard did live there for a while, but clarified that he was a divorcee. She also shared that during our time as neighbors, I had informed her that my wife had left me and I had filed for a unilateral divorce. Dorothy added that, as far as she knew, I intended to bequeath all my assets a charity since I had no other family besides my brother. This was why she found it strange to see two women snooping around my house. The conversation fell into an uncomfortable silence before Dorothy inquired if they had a death certificate or a will. They replied in the negative. Dorothy explained that once they had those documents, they could take them to the county's record office. If they were indeed the rightful owners of the property, they could then get the deed in their name. My wife did not take kindly to Dorothy's suggestion. She asked Dorothy who she thought she was and started screaming, asserting that Dorothy had no authority to interfere in her affairs. She also accused Dorothy of being nosy and demanded that she mind her own business. I felt a deep sense of embarrassment. The people in this neighborhood had been nothing but kind to me. And here, my ex-wife was making a scene and disturbing their peace. Part of me wanted to go out there and give her a piece of my mind, but I chose to stick with our plan. Dorothy, bless her heart, apologized to them and explained that she was merely trying to be helpful. She returned to her own home, and shortly after my ex-wife and daughter left. After finishing work, I went over to Dorothy's place to apologize. She brushed it off, mentioning that while she found my wife's behavior repulsive, she also found the outburst somewhat amusing. I wish I could agree with her, but I knew my wife could be hot-tempered when upset. If she ever returns, I am determined to confront her and ask her to leave me in peace. She came back again yesterday. I was sitting in my home office when I heard a loud crash. Rushing out to the living room, I found my front window smashed, and people were outside screaming. I thought there might be a maniac on the loose, and it turns out I wasn't entirely wrong. It was my ex-wife. She had smashed my window, and my neighbors were out there trying to stop her. Apparently, she had been causing a ruckus for a while, but I hadn't heard it because I had my noise-canceling headphones on while doing some QA work. Frankly, I wouldn't have heard her even if I hadn't paused the mic for a break. When I got outside, two of my elderly neighbors were doing their best to restrain my ex from causing more damage. Both she and Layla were holding bats, and they had already broken a few of my potted plants. I grabbed her by the arm and asked if she had lost her damn marbles. Needless to say, she was shocked to see me, or rather shocked to see me alive. I told both her and my daughter to get off my property before I called the cops. Unbeknownst to me, my neighbors had already placed the call. She seemed hurt by my words and asked why I hadn't contacted her after I got better. She insisted that she and Layla would have come back. I told her that when we got married, we made vows to stand by each other in sickness and health, and she broke those vows. I wanted nothing to do with her anymore. She's no longer my wife. I sent the divorce papers months ago. I asked her again to leave. Then she asked about our daughter and mentioned that she's going to college next year and can't afford the tuition on her own. I replied. Your daughter was fine with abandoning me too, and I'm ready to give up all my parental rights to you. You should have thought of that before you abandoned me. I don't want anything to do with either of you. After hearing that, she went from upset to angry, calling me selfish and heartless, which I found rather amusing given the circumstances. She's the last person who should be calling anyone selfish. I screamed back, called her an entitled jerk and made it clear that I'd ensure she never got a dime from me again. Then she swung at me with the bat just as the cops showed up. They immediately arrested both her and my daughter. They asked if I wanted to press charges, and, of course, I did. My ex and daughters started crying loudly as they were loaded into the back of the police car, but I felt no sympathy for them. I had everything that happened on camera, including my wife smashing the window, and I had already submitted it to the police. After work, I ordered a new window and cleaned up the glass. Someone will be coming to deal with it tomorrow. But for now, a rigged-up tarp is keeping out the elements. Dorothy gave me some buckets to put my plants in until I can replace the pots. Curious about what had brought my ex-wife back, I did some digging. It turns out her mom passed away 2 months ago. And they found out that the house they had been staying in didn't belong to her or her husband. It belonged to his cousin. The cousin decided to kick them out because he wanted to sell it. With both of my ex-wife's parents now gone, she and our daughter sold most of their parents' belongings and had been living in a motel for a while. When they came back to our old home and saw Kara there, they assumed I had died and went snooping around for recordings of my assets and purchases, which is how they found me. Anyhow, they're being charged with vandalism, attempted break-in, and attempted assault. Since Layla is a minor, she's getting community service, but my ex-wife is going to serve some time as this was obviously premeditated. I'm thinking about getting a restraining order too. At least for now, I won't have to worry about her again for a good long while. Dear listener, if you have reached this far, please click on the subscribe button. It will be a great help.